New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
So there you are, the guy who he calls his creative spouse, the man he talks to as much as he talks to his wife, the man who he gives a huge amount of credit to. How did this begin, this working relationship?
I'd be curious to hear your version of this, because if you really want to go to the Rashomon room where it happened, I remember when I first saw Lin, I went up to Wesleyan University. I'd heard about him. I'd heard about this early version of a show called In the Heights that he had done from a couple of my good friends. And we went up in 2002 to see his senior thesis. He walked around the corner.
Not my finest hour, my senior thesis.
No.
In the Heights was pretty good.
Yeah.
Senior thesis, not so much.
Yeah.
And Lin walked around the corner, and I believe I promptly dropped something showing my suaveness immediately.
He dropped his soda.
I dropped my
All
soda
over the
on the
floor.
ground. So Lin's first version of me
Was
me
dropping a soda.
dropping a soda and like trying to rub it into the carpet. And I was like, hey, I'm going to change your life. So probably not the best way to start
Is
a...
that what you said?
That's probably what I meant. I'm not sure what I said. I might have just said hello, but there was a lot of subtext.
So we met at Wesleyan when he came to see my show, but the first time we sat down to talk was to talk about In the Heights.
Yeah.
And Tommy had 15 ideas to every one of mine. And he said, Usnavi's a great character, but he's only in 3 scenes in your show. He should be the narrator because everyone goes through his bodega. And In Washington Heights is a great song. It introduces us to the world of the show, but you have it third. It should be the first song in your show. And you can introduce all the characters. And I'm sitting there like this going, oh, this guy's going to make my show a lot better.
Yeah.
And he's after the same thing I am.
Well, you know, I'd heard this demo version of In the Heights in 2000. And so I'd had 2 years to wait to think about what I would say when I finally got a chance to meet him. So
what was the buzz about it then?
about this one,
Yeah.
bold, not interested in doing things the way that they should be done. You know, he was,
Sort of like Alexander Hamilton?
if only I'd known. You know, he was the freshman who was in the play the senior did. He was the guy who was writing a show and then producing it his freshman year, and freshmen didn't do that. So my initial hearings of him, which were just the whispers of this slightly aggravating, over-anxious freshman, were, you know, his refusal to play by the rules. He thought, well, I want to do this, so I'm going to do it. I then heard about the show he had written the next year once I'd graduated, and once I heard that, I realized that he was after something that was also full of depth, and that ambition was not without reason or merit. So,
And did you feel like at that time you could add value?
yes. But I also felt like I was in the process. I just turned 25 years old. Lin was 22. I was also in the process of trying to surround myself with people that could do things that I couldn't do, and I was looking for fellowship. I was looking for other people that seemed to be on the same frequency. And my hunch from listening to those early versions of Heights is that we might be fluent in the same language. We might have similar interests. We might have a similar pool of things to draw from.
Fluent in the same language.
Yes, which is for me English, and for him
Some other language.
something else. Yeah, you know, I mean, what Lin showed in those early versions of Heights was that he wanted to use today's music to tell a story about something that might be, you know, not focused on by, you know, when the people talk about writing, you know, what do I want to write about? Lin said, well, what if I wrote about the neighborhood where I was? Or what if I wrote about the neighborhood that I wanted to belong to? Or what it meant to try to find your way and establish an identity? And all of those things that I think were somewhere unarticulated within me, I found accessed in that show.
With today's music.
With today's music.
When did you first hear the idea of Hamilton?
It was probably, you know, I remember I was rehearsing the show with Alex Lacamoire, music director, who then ended up, you know, obviously going on to play at the White House with Lin. So it was somewhere around when the ask came through. I mean, Lin had talked about it. I have a very early email where Lin took his vacation, where he grabbed the book. This famous vacation, apparently Lin went to Mexico, I keep on reading about. And so Lin went to Mexico, grabbed this big book by Ron Chernow, and he and I were instant messaging.
On GChat.
On GChat, as we did. And there's a GChat that I found that actually was my opening night gift for him, sent on August 1st, 2008. So not yesterday.
And what did it say?
It said, hey, I'm drinking a lot of this kind of alcohol. I am catching up on the first season of Mad Men, which was this new show that everyone was talking about. And I'm reading this Hamilton book. And I think I said something like, great, when are you back? I mean, it did not even, register that.
Did any part of you, when you realized that this was much more than just this book he's reading, did you think, man, that's crazy?
No.
Man.
I'd been down crazy road with him.
This wasn't crazy. You'd heard crazy.
Yeah, I stopped doubting him in 2002. So when I first, when I first met him and realized in that initial conversation what he was after and the passion of his pursuit, I would be foolish to not listen and to try to.
So when did
encourage.
you know you're better if he's working with you?
2002. But I knew he was the right fit for Hamilton because, again, just like with Heights, he was saying all the right things. I did.
Saying all the right things?
Yeah. Well, one, Tommy grew up in Virginia. Tommy grew up in the part of the country that I don't know, and is also very well represented in the show. His mother is a historical archivist. So he comes by all that just as honestly as he came by all the themes in the Heights. That's also within him. And he heard the second song I wrote for the show, and he said, you can be writing this a lot faster. He said, it's great that you're taking your time, but a song a year is not a great output. And
We'll be here a while.
Yeah, and so we just started plotting. I mean, that day, I think, started plotting, all right, well, what are we going to work towards to get more songs out?
And to Lynn's credit in this, he wrote the first song, and when the thing happened at the White House, it didn't exist. There was no video of it. I remember Lynn saying, they filmed it, it went really well, I wonder if it will ever see the light of day.
Right.
And then months and months later, they decided to put out this little YouTube on this little whitehouse.gov channel that started ricocheting around the world.
But there was a good 6 months between me performing it and it appearing online.
I was in rehearsal for something here. He went down with Alex, they did it, and he said it went really well. And I said, great, where do you want to have lunch? I mean, it's like, congrats, I'm
And then when
excited.
you saw it, do you know what everybody was talking about?
Yes, I knew what he was talking about. And Lynn, I had heard the song, he had played the song for me. But the other thing that I think about a lot with this, of all of the sliding doors that needed to slide into place for us to be sitting here talking to you, is if Lynn had really choked during that performance on that White House stage.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens to be something, no matter how many times I watch it, it's like, no, you should do it like that.
Yeah.
He just knocked it out of the park. So that happens, it comes out 6 months later, so it's 2009. We were doing a benefit for the show Freestyle Love Supreme we have, and Lynn decided to perform a song. Now, we have also, as we were looking back through emails, which is basically what opening night is a chance to go back through your correspondence, which is all electronic, and say, look how foolish we were then. Look how smart we might have been. And so I was looking back through some emails from 2011, and Lynn was going to perform a song he wrote. And there was a sort of standalone song he was going to do, and it was in the rundown for the night. And then in the next email, my shot is in that rundown. So again, whatever conversation that was that somehow nudged you to do that, he does my shot. He does it by himself. It's about 98 people are watching. It's a very small theater, and we're now in the summer of 2011. So, a song every 16 months or so. And we're standing at this party afterwards. Everyone's coming up and patting his back and, and wiping his brow. And I'm just sort of staring at him. And I said, we should get going because it would be great if you were younger than Hamilton by the time this thing was finished. And something really kicked in because the next day, we had talked that night, we said, let's just find anywhere to do this. Let's pick a date 6 months from now. Work on 2 songs a month. Let's try to get a dozen songs and just see what we have. The next day, when Lynn and I spoke, he said, I think we have a plan. I mean, it just, something dropped. The needle dropped between that performance and the next morning.
There's a bit of Alexander Hamilton in him then.
Yeah.
Pushing, urgent, let's get it going. 16 months is not enough. One song is not enough for 16 months.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the moments between Usnavi and Sonny in Heights, which is sort of the song we did coming out of our childhood into our early adulthood. And then I look at a lot of these scenes between Washington and Hamilton in this show, and I think, oh, Lynn's just writing about us. That's so, look at him. He's just writing about us. He doesn't really know it. And I'm not sure who's who, but
Yeah, it depends on the scene.
it depends
really.
on the scene,
Yeah.
depends on the moment. But I think that the two of us have recognized in each other this ability to use the other standard for our own pursuit. So I hear Lynn when I'm having these conversations, and Lynn's on stage, and I'm talking to our choreographer Andy, or I'm talking to one of my designers, or I'm looking at the picture and trying to figure something out without the benefit of having, him right next to me. I hear him, and so that certainly allows some sort of expedited process. Because there was a moment we were working on something in rehearsal, and someone was singing a song for the first time, and I looked at Lynn, and he looked at me, and he said, "I got it." I said, "You don't even know what I'm going to say." And he said, "I got it." And I said, "Well, write it down." And so he
He wrote it down.
We finished the moment, and then he looks at me and I said, "Well, what was I going to say?" And not only to say it verbatim and in my annoying cadence, but just said it distilled in one sentence.
had
I
it.
thought, oh wow, now we're on some sort of subliminal, telekinesis level where he just knew.
song was that?
It was like it was an early thing, like when we're just like a few of us in a room.
Are you just hearing all this?
I don't remember this moment.
Well, because it happens so unconsciously for him, and I think that's a testament also to our other collaborators, Alex and Andy, the hive mind, which Lynn speaks about.
Yes.
My job is very simple: make sure we're all on the same page, telling the same story.
Very simple.
And the reality is,
Make sure we're on the same page, telling the same story.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing you can do.
Exactly.
yeah, but it's the simplest focus I have. If I can do that, then I've done my job. And when you work with people it's not only finishing each other's sentences, it's having the paragraph in their head before you can say it. Makes
So
it easier.
therefore, I was going to ask you about, do you have to sort of hold it in as well? Or is it simply giving him the surroundings that make what he does better?
It depends. It's song to song,
Yeah.
because some of these things just come out fully formed. And he says, "I have this idea, and some of the smartest comments I've ever had are good. Keep going."
Is it an affirmation of your instinct?
Absolutely. But then there's also the moments where Tommy has an insight that completely unlocks the song. And I might have been hitting it. I've been attacking the moment from 10 different directions. I'll give you a great example. One of the songs we rewrote for Broadway, Washington. Washington is stepping down from office. He's doing this audacious act of stepping down from office, and I've written versions of it, and it all feels writerly. It doesn't feel like something someone says. And Tommy goes, well, offhandedly, because he is a son of Virginia, he goes, well, there's also Washington's whole vine and fig tree thing. And I went, his vine and fig tree thing? The quote, the vine and fig tree. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, oh, that was Washington's favorite Bible quote. He would always say it in speeches. Everyone gets their own vine, their own fig tree. And I went, And he went away to rehearsal, and I looked up the passage, and it was exactly what we needed to capture. It was Washington's favorite Bible quote underscores how his main concern is the safety of the future of this nation. And it's so beautifully put by the Bible. I can't improve on the Bible. I just needed to quote it. And I would never have known that. But Tommy said, vine and fig tree thing. And it just totally unlocked the moment that needed to happen.
By the way, it was a Washington-Hamilton moment, right? So I felt like we really need to investigate. The other thing in that situation, which is a credit to the speed at which all of our experience has led us to, we were actually rehearsing in the other room. Andy was running a sequence, and I just popped into the place where Lynn was. Lynn was in room C, we were in room B. And this was like a 6-minute conversation. And he's just kind of banging his head against the wall, and we're talking and trying to figure this thing out. I say this, I'm always very struck when Lynn says he doesn't know something. That happens, once every 7.5 months. So that's a little strange for me. We have the conversation, and then he comes in 45 minutes later and he says, I got it. So once the penny drops or the faucet is on or whatever image you want to use, it's unlocked and it just happens. And that song then was done. And then he took that little seed and he grew it, and you walk in next time and you're like, oh, that's a redwood. It doesn't just become a sapling. It's immediately this other thing.
Do you have a feeling for that?
For
What he's just described?
Of when the right idea hits?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That a seedling becomes a redwood.
Yeah. And some of these, and it is song to song. There are songs like The Room Where It Happens that took weeks because they're crossword puzzles. You're getting a lot of information, you're trying to find the most compelling way to impart that information. Then there's also moments in this show, like there's a song Eliza sings to Hamilton called That Would Be Enough. And her husband's just been fired, and she's pregnant with their first child. And she basically says, I just need you to come home at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I wrote that song in 45 minutes, cried the whole time I was writing it. And it's about as pure an expression of, I think, what we hope for in our relationships as I can get. And it doesn't require imparting history. It doesn't require knowing all these historical facts. It's just a wife saying to her husband, I don't care about what you make or what you do, I just need you to come home at the end of the day. Yeah. And those are moments you're grateful for because they come of a piece. That song got written in 45 minutes. And you're grateful when that happens, when it all comes at once, because a lot of the time you're picking at it to unearth it.
And also, I remember reading about writers and how they worked, and I think it was Hemingway who talked about the fact that you're always writing. And Lin is always writing. It's just sometimes you have to have the soil prepared to accept the thing. But he's writing, so when something gets unlocked in 45 minutes or an hour or a day or two, that was 8.5 straight months of thinking about it, even if it's something that we didn't even know we needed. Now, there were some songs we knew we had this moment for Burr, this wait for it idea, that we talked about and talked about. Just like we talked about the idea for a Washington Hamilton moment, that song felt right for a moment in Act Two to see our two heroes come together and have this one last chance to express their affection, to speak to the country, to do all of these things. And that was the one I kept on saying, yeah. And then there's that song with those guys. And he's like, yeah, but look what I wrote. And so luckily there was so much room to expand and to cover. But when they come out, there's not a lot of shutdown, in the writer part of him.
Yeah.
And so then it's about unlocking. And a lot of my job is to try to just create an environment where if it's unlocked, it has a place to go.
And how important is it to have someone that can do that?
It's everything. It's the whole ball game. Because it requires, Tommy has to know how to unlock Paul Tazewell when he's creating the costumes. He has to know the right thing to say to Paul when they're having their meeting, just like he has to come and talk to me and say, that moment's not quite there yet, this is coming, what if you did this? It's what I do in 1,000 different directions and in 1,000 different disciplines. So I'm in awe of that ability. And then extends to every actor and understanding when a word of praise is exactly what's needed, or whether it's a deep philosophical discussion, or whether it's good, keep going. He code switches with every person he interacts with and gets them all marching in the same direction. That's super hard.
Choosing actors.
The fun part.
The fun part.
Yeah.
Why?
Putting the team together is, that's the thing. We talk about this a lot. When you do a show, the show starts at 8 o'clock. Between 8 and the time the show ends, I know where they're going to be standing, what they're going to be wearing, what they're going to say, and how quickly they're going to move through that, that particular moment. The show is 2.5 hours of the day. It's the 8, 10, 12 hours in the dark that really matters. So one of the things that we talk about constantly and have since 2002 is try to find the people who can do the job between the lines, but let's try to find human beings we want to be around. And so that takes time, but when you have material that gives the actors so much information and so much blood and fuel, I'm not always able to say I know who it is, but I'm getting pretty good at identifying when they walk in the room. And that's the thing in putting together this particular company, which I think is as fine a company as has been assembled. It's certainly, it also made me need to be better. It made him need to write, to write at a level that was going to be elevated, because we were all trying to put something out there that was unlike what we've done.
Let me just take you through the characters. George Washington.
Sometimes me, sometimes Lin. But always Chris Jackson.
Always Chris Jackson.
But always Chris Jackson. Because there is a dignity and an inherent understanding of what it means to lead that you can't coach and you can't teach. They say you can't coach height. Chris Jackson has it. He was given that, and we have understood in our dozen years of knowing him, from our relationship and in the Heights and beyond that, to understand that if you want someone to play the greatest American superhero, who can also play George, who can also play a guy named George who was scared sometimes and didn't know what he wanted to do and wanted to go home and have that humanity there. Lin keeps on holding on to this idea of who these people could be as characters. And Chris Jackson was just someone who was never far from any conversation about what Washington was able to do in our show.
Aaron Burr.
Despite Lin's best efforts to play Aaron Burr.
What does that mean? Oh, I know what it means.
Lin wrote himself into Usnavi and wrote himself out of Burr. He's like, this guy's getting pretty singy. I know what your skill set is. I feel like you're making a left.
All right, explain that.
Well, I think, what Lin, and Lin has said this many times, and we talked about this a lot in the making of the show, there's a little of every character in Lin, and there is a lot of Lin in all of these characters. The Hamilton part of Lin understands going after something with focus and determination and blinders. The part of Lin that also wants to make sure it's the right moment is the Burr part of Lin. So he writes them both with equal compassion and ability. And I think what Leslie provides in this show is someone who is the other temperature of Lin's Hamilton and Hamilton the character, because part of the conversation we were having really early in the show is the show has to be about Hamilton, not Lin playing Hamilton. And Lin's generosity of spirit is much like a good host. He makes sure everybody else has eaten before he eats. That's why his music is the music done last. No, I'll eat in a minute. Here's something for you, George Washington. Here's something for you, Angelica Burr. Everybody else gets theirs, and then the last thing that gets written is the duel, or his part of One Last Time. There's a reason for that, and it's that spirit of generosity.
I'm a good host.
You good host.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson.
Lin and I were working on the show early on when it was kind of just the two of us kicking the tires on this thing. And we were pretty certain that we wanted Lafayette to come back as Thomas Jefferson. This idea of doubling the characters, that his friends would become his foes, his closest friend would become his son. That was something really early on in our conversations. Yeah. And Daveed Diggs was this secret that a lot of other people knew about, that we also happen to know about. And we were thinking, well, who can do this? And then they also have to do that, but who has the charisma, and they have to fill the stage and be a better rapper than Hamilton? Oh, it's Daveed. Do you want to call him, or do you want me to call him? Yeah. And then we called him. And I remember an early conversation I had with Daveed, and I said, hey, I'm not sure what you're doing in a couple weeks, but if you could cancel it, that would be great. Because we're doing this sit around, we're just trying some stuff out. I'm working on a new show with Lin. We had known him from Freestyle Love Supreme. Our friend Anthony had introduced us to him years before. And I'd seen him on stage, and I'd worked with him, and Lin had been on stage with him. And he has a relationship with the audience which is chemical, because he walks on stage and they stop looking at anything else but him.
Right.
And Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette needed to be that commanding and that powerful to be on Hamilton's level. And Daveed has proven day in and day out, from rehearsal to performance and everything else, that he has those qualities.
Yeah, I said to him earlier, if you come back for the second term or the third time, you can't wait for his entrance, which is exactly the quality you're talking about. Now, these are all success stories. Did you ever get it wrong? Did you say, let's go here, and it turned out either you thought about it, you got closer to it? I mean, casting.
And when you're doing a show where the casting for this also extends to, it's everybody on stage, because the fullness of this ensemble and the fact that the storytelling is embraced and held up and supported by everyone on stage, that was something that's made our rigor, extend from, all the way down the line. Everybody on stage needed to be able to imbue and dimensionalize every moment, because we were going to ask that of all of them, and there's nowhere to hide up here. There's nowhere to hide.
And what's interesting here, as you describe this, is that it's not just, I mean, you know, here's the Music Man.
76 trombones.
That's the song.
I mean, it's like a real gimmick he has.
Yeah. That's it, exactly. But here's the Music Man. But you know exactly if that music is missing something, or needs to be underlined, or needs to be expanded.
Yes, and I have.
You know that.
I have an instinct to it, and I'm smart enough to surround myself with people that if I can't discern that I can turn to our music director, Alex, or Andy, and identify collectively what that is. And it's something we talk about all the time. And this was a shift for me. You know, when you're a young director, you feel like you have to have all the answers. And then you get to a certain place in your career and you realize that identifying the best idea is more important than having the best idea. And when you have a group of people working at this level,
It's called judgment.
it's that to me, that was the big shift for me when I was able to
When you were
unburden my-
confident in your judgment, or
Yes. And I think getting older is about being able to silence all the noise and listen to your instinct. That little man inside of you in Double Indemnity, you know,
Yeah.
that is saying, hey, him or her, or yes, needs something else, maybe it's this, you know, and you know how to listen to that more effectively. And Lynn said something really early on that I think is also true. You get a lot of ideas are flying around. When you wake up the next morning with a stomach ache, about one or two of them, that's probably the thing you should work on.
you know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also how I read criticism. I can, you know, there are criticisms. I've read raves where I'm like, you actually don't understand what the play's about. And I've read pans where they say, oh, well, they're right about that one part, and the other part hurt my feelings. But
But they
if
showed
something's-
you they understood something.
But if something hurts my stomach the next day, I go, there's something to that. Because otherwise I'd have let it go. I'd have brushed it off. Good or bad. I have a pretty good gut about that stuff.
Yeah. You got to be smart and confident to
Yeah,
do
why
that.
is that hitting something in me?
Yeah. And to understand exactly why it's hitting you that
Yeah,
way.
that's the hard part. Yeah.
And one of the things that happened when we were off Broadway is there was a lot of conversation about the length of the show. And the conversation that was then translated to us, what we actually heard is, do we have the right amount of events? Is it too much?
Yes.
It's not about what time you're getting out. Although there is a psychological impact of looking and seeing, oh, it's 11:15, or wow, 2 minutes to 11, or where's my parking, you know, and all that stuff that happens. But for us, the opportunity to get back in after off Broadway was not cutting time. It was making sure that we were staying along the branch, you know, that we wanted to stay along, and not breaking off and taking away the energy from the audience so that the end of the show was not able to be fully absorbed. And Lynn is as judicious and ruthless with his work as anyone I've ever worked with. So yes, it was good and it worked and it got a laugh, great, not the right kind of laugh, it's gone. And no more conversation about it. His ego works in different ways.
How does his ego work?
Well, you know, the number one question that I get after what does a director do is, how is Lynn handling this?
Oh.
I mean, that's, you know, if I was to do my Family Feud, that would be the one that comes up. How is Lynn handling
Survey
this?
says.
What people are saying, what Lynn thinks about himself and his perception of himself is not informed by that. It's about trying to make something he can be proud of. And I think that standard is the thing that drives him. So do I think he likes to look at pictures of himself and read an article? Yes. But Lynn will also read the article, and we'll both find the one thing that says that he's not quite, or almost, and that's the thing that we'll
And take
circle.
it seriously if he thinks it merits it.
Well, or just laugh at it
laugh
and
at
be
it.
like, oh,
Yeah.
right, I might be on the cover of a magazine. It doesn't mean I'm a supermodel.
Certainly not.
That's just it.
He's talked about the 11 things here, and there's such a collaboration. How do you take a set? I mean, is this considered in the annals of musical theater a simple set or a complex set?
It's a simple set that actually is, of course, you know, a Goldberg machine.
Interesting. So therefore, the question I have is, you know, is this set sort of designed to fit this music?
Yes, because our feeling was, my set designer David Corns and I have worked on a few things. So we knew that the actors were going to be populating a world that was going to be brick and rope and wood. And Oscar Eustis encouraged us to be conscious of the fact that the people that were building houses back then were also building ships. So this, I didn't want it to look like Deadwood, and I didn't want it to look like a boat. Yeah. And so I had this, you know, I had this reaction to it, and then that sort of unlocked, and I thought, but that's what they had. He's right, Oscar's right. So lean into that. What we wanted to do was create a palette, no walls, nothing that was going to be an obstruction, so that we could have a song like the end of Act One that actually is 7 or 8 years, just like you can have a song like Satisfied, which goes back and looks at one night and takes 5 minutes. You know, 5 minutes of showtime and 5 minutes of showtime, 6 years, one night. And so because of the telescopic nature of Lynn's writing and the kaleidoscopic nature of that as well, we wanted to make sure that this environment was something that embraced the ability to move quickly and the publicness of the time. So the way that we tried to make the second level was the operating theaters of the day. You know, was looking at Parliament back then, that these fights were happening in front of people and privately, but if we wanted our storytellers to be witness to history, as we are talking about fundamentally who tells stories and how we absorb that, then we needed to be able to be in the shadows and watch, and we needed to embrace the fact that these people that made this country were doing so in rooms that were for all to see. And so that's why we wanted the levels to exist.
And the turntable?
And the turntable was a late addition that our set designer mentioned in our very first meeting. And then we said, let's make sure we can do it without it. Let's make sure we can do it without it. And we did a workshop without it, and the show played. And then we started thinking a little more, and our choreographer, Andy, had never worked on a turntable, and I'd only done a play. And it's it's like learning how to ride a bike on the moon. I mean, if you don't know how to use this thing, there's a mathematics to it that you have to understand. Blankenbuehler understood it and taught himself how to get on top of this thing. But David Corns said, think about what we can do if it's a double turntable and we can have different directions. Think about the cyclical nature. Yeah. And then, again, if someone has a better idea, learn how to say yes. And so we said yes, and that was it, and we never looked back.
And then when you did the cast album, I mean, this was an elaborate doing.
I grew up not seeing Broadway shows, but loving cast albums.
Yes.
And our show is sung through. So when you have our cast album, you have the oral experience of our show. So we are trying to represent that in a way that you can go home and listen to it, and you're going to imagine your own version of Hamilton, because frankly, it's tough to get a ticket. It's tough to get a ticket to our show right now, and it's the way it lives in the world for most of the world. So it really is our ambassador, our representation of what we've created on stage to the world at large.
Can you do things here you couldn't do at the public theater?
You can share the show with more people. I think the performances grew and became deeper. The experience of just doing the thing, of doing 100, 150 performances, teaches something that makes it better than when I'm there pushing and pulling and poking. That's why the show is better a month, 2 months after you open than when we're there noting the show every day. I think the conversation
Do you
between...
agree with that?
Yes.
And frankly, like, part of my job is knowing when to take my hands off. You know, when something is saturated, when something is full and just needs to, you know, embrace whatever is there and get the nutrients out of that, you have to learn how to just watch the show and know that when you go backstage and see somebody, you're going to talk about the game, you're going to talk about what their dog did that day, and then you're going to say, I'll see you tomorrow. And that's as valuable as, I had 2 thoughts about that scene. You know what? That's how that scene went this one night, 100 shows in. Let it breathe. Trust the people that you have trusted all along. And that's not hard to do with this group.
What has the audience taught you?
The audience has taught us a lot. One, man, are they paying attention?
Yeah.
And I've learned, we have nights when they're raucous, we have nights when they're silent, and I love both, because they both mean we're in and we're along for the ride, and we're trying to catch every word you're throwing at us, and every idea you're throwing at us. And they also, there's moments, Tommy said it really well when he was actually telling us to be quiet backstage. He said this is some of the loudest moments on Broadway and some of the quietest moments on Broadway, and they're all in one show. And I can feel that in the audience too. I can feel them rise and fall with us as Hamilton rises and falls. And they're with us every step of the way, and we learn an enormous amount from them. There's moments where the audience explodes. Immigrants, we get the job done. There's a moment of explosion. We added bars to give them room to explode between off-Broadway and Broadway. Then we added too many bars.
Because it's a hot topical situation?
I think it's because it's such a simple idea that we always forget.
Yeah.
Of course.
Which is
of course, the creator of our financial system and one of our greatest commanders in the Revolutionary War were both immigrants. And most of the people in this audience, if they're not immigrants, their parents were, their grandparents were, or their 8th grandparents were. It's an American idea that we forget every 20 years or so. And so they remember and they go, ah! And they're delighted to remember because it's a part of the founding of our country too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Remarkable partnership.
Thank you.
Jonathan Groff is here. He plays King George III in Lin-Manuel Miranda's hit musical Hamilton. Ben Brantley calls Groff's performance as the jilted King of England delicious. That's him. He previously starred in the HBO series Looking, a television film will air next year to wrap up the acclaimed comedy drama. So I'm very pleased to have Jonathan Groff at this table for the first time. Welcome.
I love this table too. I heard this is
This table loves having you here.
It's the original table.
Let me turn to Hamilton. Why? Why? Does it have such a hold on all of us? Everybody who I know who comes to Washington, who comes to New York, wants to go.
Yeah.
Everybody I know who lives in New York is wanting to go and waiting to go.
Yeah.
You know, I did a 60 Minutes piece.
Yes.
And part of the genius of Lin-Manuel Miranda is all there.
Yeah.
But what is it for you
Oh God, it's so many
that
things.
makes it so magical?
It's unlike anything I've ever been a part of or ever seen before. I got to see the show before I joined the cast off Broadway. And I said yes to doing the show before I had seen or heard anything. The actor that was playing King George off Broadway had to leave to fulfill another commitment. So a week after they opened at the public, I stepped in. And I'm friends with Lin. Right. And Lin, as you know, because you've met him, is the most like energetic, positive, intoxicating human being. Yes. And we'd met years before when I was doing Spring Awakening and he was doing In the Heights. And he asked me to come in and step in for this actor who was playing King George off Broadway. And I said yes, without having seen or heard anything, because of Lin. Because Lin is just that, as a person you say yes to. And then I'd seen In the Heights and I loved In the Heights, and I sat down in the audience at the Public Theater, and you could feel the energy in the theater before the show even began. And the show began, and I just wept from start to finish. I was so moved by, as everyone is that comes to see it, by the ingenuity of the writing and the freshness and the direction, Tommy Kail's direction, and the choreography and the cast, and the whole like idea was just so incredible, let alone the story itself. Yeah. It's just such an emotional, moving, inspiring piece. And so then I got to go into it off Broadway, and then I got to join the cast for the move to Broadway, and it's just been one of the most extraordinary things.
But you never saw Brian.
I did, yeah.
Oh, you did?
I got to see him do it. Yeah, I totally saw him do it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I saw him. I like flew into New York on a Friday. I saw the show over the weekend 5 times in a row, and then I went in on Tuesday. I had a day of rehearsal.
You saw it 5 times in a row?
Yep, saw it 5 times in a row. At the end, I said to Lin, I was like, I feel like I'm going to need therapy, because if I see this show one more time and weep for 3 hours, I'm going to have a mental breakdown. I can't like watch it again.
But you seem to have shaped it in your own way. Was that written that way, or did you shape it that way?
Well, I have like this theory about when I did Spring Awakening. I did that for 2 years, and we had a lot of actors come through and like replace. So I have this like, sometimes people will come in, when people come into a show and try and like make it their own right away, I find that really annoying. so my sort of take on it is you go in, you respect what's been there before, and you just try and not mess anybody up when you first go in, anyone else up. You're there to like come in, stand in, and do the thing. And so that's what I did. I sort of like came in, did the job that was there, did what Brian did, and then as time wore on, and I became more familiar with the part, and more familiar with the company, and more familiar with the audience and the piece and the show, I started to shape it and make it my own. And I decided to do like an accent. So I decided to do a British accent, which it started as like an RP sort of standard thing and then morphed into like a character accent. And so all of that, the off-Broadway run for me was kind of like 2 months of a rehearsal in front of an audience. Yeah. And it was amazing, and it was exploratory, and I learned a lot from it.
How many appearances do you make? In the public? Yeah. No. How many appearances did you make during the 2.5 hours of the production?
I do like three. I have 3 numbers. Yeah.
How do you fill the time in between?
It's 9 minutes of stage time.
Right. And
when we were off Broadway, I watched the show every day, because the way the public theater is set up, there are like, it's to call them the VOMs, where like you can enter from the audience, right. And I could stand in the VOM and so perfectly watch the stage. And so every night when we were off Broadway, I would leave it. I was like, I can't believe I'm in the show. I would leave the stage and go stand in the VOM and watch. And it was amazing, particularly off Broadway, because the show was still evolving and finding its power, and the performers were still discovering some big things. And so like The Room Where It Happens, Leslie's big number. It's almost like I watched through the course of the 2 months of off-Broadway from when it opened. I pretty much joined right after it opened, and then it ran for 2 months. I watched that number become a production number, because it's like suddenly the performances get bigger, that by the end of the public theater run, it was like the show wanted to explode out of the theater. It was like between the audience's anticipation growing and growing, and then the actors on stage filling the space, it was like I could not watch it. I couldn't not leave the stage and watch the show, because it had this like explosive energy at the public.
But what happens though when you come out? It's almost like King George says to America, or to the colonies, or to the Revolution, we have a love affair. Mm-hmm. And you've got to come back. Mm-hmm. You really will come back. Mm-hmm. If you don't come back, I'll have to kill you and your family. That's what he says. Mm-hmm. You know? But he says it was the way you say it. It's a showstopper. It's what it is, and you know that.
Well, it's such a brilliant piece of writing, because I feel like in the show, it's the first song that isn't really rapped, and it's also the first character from history that we see walk out that is completely recognizable, as we know. Granted, I'm 30 years old, so it's a little different than we're used to seeing in history books.
But the costume says something.
But the costume, and
the hair, the white wig.
And the wig, exactly. The minute King George walks out, everybody knows who this person is. Everybody knows his perspective. Everybody knows, I'm sure they're projecting already the minute he walks out, his feelings. Yeah. And so it's this brilliant moment in the show, writing-wise, that Lin has written, where everything's sort of, and Tommy, who is the amazing director, and Andy Blankenbuehler, who choreographed it. The show is so full of movement. There's a revolving stage. It's all this rapping happening, and then the show kind of stops. The show itself stops, and King George walks out, and the audience immediately knows who it is. And then Tommy, our director, said to me, this is a moment about stillness. And so that was his big thing of direction to me from when I started with the show, was
stillness. It's
a moment of stillness. It's like the one moment the audience gets of stillness. And so whatever that means to you, embrace it how you may, but being as still as possible is the most powerful thing for this moment.
And what's your first words?
You say, the price of my love's not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by. Why so sad?
That's great.
It's so brilliantly written. I know it is delicious writing. It's such a.
And you love saying it every night.
I love saying it every night. And I really, before I joined the show, I knew that it was 9 minutes of showtime, and I thought, that'll be fun. And it's Lin, and I'm sort of there for him, and I'm there because I heard so many great things about the show. But I have not gotten sick of I've done it over 100 times, and it's 9 minutes. But it is so. It is so naughty and 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 wonderful, and the audience is always so receptive to it, again because of all the reasons we described, that it's like a drug coming out there every night. It's so amazing to be just breathing in the air of the Hamilton experience, and that alone is incredibly special and something I'll never forget.
You know a bit about Broadway. Has Broadway seen anything like this for a while?
No. This is one this. What was really interesting is that when we were in previews and after we'd opened, the album had not come out yet.
Yeah.
And the 60 Minutes piece had not come out yet. And they had not released really clips from the show.
Right.
And so for about 2.5 months, we were sold out. No one knew anything about the show. And the lights would go down and people would start screaming. I know. Like they knew what was going to happen. It was like a show, it was like Rent in its 10th year, when people have the words memorized and the lights go down and people are excited. This was the lights going down with people excited about like a show, an original piece of theater with no celebrities in it. Just about even a historical celebrity who's
playing all people of Hispanics and blacks.
Yeah.
Playing the founding fathers.
Chris Jackson plays George Washington.
Exactly.
I mean, it's Daveed Diggs as Thomas Jefferson.
And Lafayette.
Yeah. It's such a brilliant piece of it's brilliant. And that people are embracing it, and when President Obama came to see
For the first time or the second time?
Yeah, the first time he saw the 6th preview. It was a Saturday matinee. And he came backstage at intermission to meet everyone. He couldn't come back after because they closed down 46th Street. So Les Mis, who was next door, and Finding Neverland across the street, everyone was locked in their theater until President Obama left 46th Street. So he couldn't come back after. So he came back at intermission, and he said, and it was really meaningful what he said. He said, people make great things, and oftentimes it never gets recognized, or it takes a long time for it to get recognized. And you guys should just really take in and enjoy the fact that you've created something great, and from the beginning it's been embraced in the way that it should be.
George Lucas saw it and said it's Shakespeare.
Yeah. Wow.
Beyonce saw it and walked back. Goes backstage and says, I'm going to take that walk.
I know.
I'm going to put that walk in my act. Your walk.
I love it. You do a good Beyonce. You doing Beyonce is making me blush. Yeah, she. I'm obsessed with Beyonce, as so many of us are.
Yes, around the globe.
Yeah. The world is obsessed with Beyonce. She came to the show, and with Jay-Z, we were all freaking out afterwards. Like, there was only 2 times that and it's a big cast, and it's a loud, rowdy, sort of like energetic group, and famous people and politicians and everybody come on stage, and it feels like a party.
Right.
Everyone's talking. There were 2 times when the entire company has been on stage surrounding someone and you could hear a pin drop, and it was President Obama and Beyonce and Jay-Z. Wow. Those are the 2 times where they were on stage and everyone's like, just sort of like waiting to hear what they're going to say and listening to hear what they say to everyone. And Jay-Z and Beyonce were so generous and so kind to everyone.
But think about this: the guy who created the characters in terms of the lines and the songs and the lyrics looks out to an audience, and he sees today's leaders. There is the vice president, there's the president, and there's Dick Cheney, and he's singing these songs about all the conflicts at the time of the founding of the republic. And there is George Washington with Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson engaged in a war of words with Alexander Hamilton, both singing and rap. It's just an extraordinary thing that you would never, if you told someone that this is going to happen, they'd say, show me.
Yeah.
So how will it change you? I mean, from personally and professionally.
I mean, hearing, the great thing about theater, I think, is that you do it 8 times a week. So it's almost a religious experience when you're doing theater, because you're repeating the same words every night, and you're listening to the same words every night. And it can't help but have an indelible print on your soul after you're done with a theater piece. And it's, as an actor, I've tried to really pick my theater pieces carefully because of that very thing. You end up getting infected by whatever sort of message the show is, because you're saying it every night. It's like a prayer almost every night in front of an audience. You're sharing this thing every night, and it becomes a part of you. And so being surrounded by Lynn's energy alone. Lynn and I share like a dressing room space, and so we're calling it the year we shared a studio apartment in Midtown. The two of us, we share a bathroom, and it's hilarious. I watch him play Nintendo, and so that alone, he's such an inspirational human being. That being surrounded by him is like, you just want to like take in that air.
Yeah, he said to me in that 60 Minutes piece, I will know it's great when kids are learning it in high school.
Yeah.
That'll be the real test.
And won't that be great?
Yeah.
See, imagining high school kids performing Hamilton is like, and I know that's a big dream for him, and I know that it's a dream that he's trying to expedite, so it doesn't take as long to get to schools as shows normally do. They have to wait for the whole Broadway run usually, and I know that he's trying to expedite
This
that.
show's shown a real sensitivity to having young people come in.
Yeah.
The production has.
Totally.
Reached out
And-
to high schools and things like that.
Yes, totally. There's a whole thing happening in the spring, and we had at the public, we had schools coming in, student matinees that were great.
I'll never forget opening night when Lynn came out.
Oh my God.
It was unbelievable. He just stood there. He couldn't,
Yeah. And it
the
felt like,
anticipation was so
and didn't it
incredible.
feel like the thing that I love, and this is the thing about Lynn, and Lynn is a genius. Like he's literally certified genius. And yet, he's so celebratory of everybody. And at that opening night, he came on stage, you were there, and it felt like a high school pep rally. It didn't feel like a fancy,
No, it didn't.
highbrow, New York, I'm a genius and welcome to my amazing piece.
And always
It was like,
sophisticated, you know.
there was nothing sophisticated about, I mean, there's everything sophisticated about the writing speaks for itself. But when he came out on stage at the end of that night, he called everyone out like it was a high school pep rally, and everyone was like,
Just pick this up. This is asking you to do something actors don't like to do.
okay.
I will fight the fight and win the war for your love, for your praise,
Oh, fight the fight for your praise.
and I'll love you till my
the
dying
dying
days. When you're
When
gone,
you're gone, I'll go mad. So don't throw away this thing we had. 'Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 ya da.
I wanted that for the close.
It is the
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Go see Hamilton if you can. For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.